Margaret, elegant and almost unrecognizable, stopped in front of the modest little house. The young girl sweeping the porch lifted her eyes, and they were just like hers. "Are you Anna Grace?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. The teenager nodded, suspicious but curious. "I'm your real mother. Your father told me you had died, but I came back to find you." Tears rolled down both their faces. 15 years of lies were about to crumble. Margaret clutched her swollen belly as she stepped carefully down the cracked sidewalk. 8 months pregnant, every step felt like carrying a watermelon while walking on eggshells. The late afternoon sun blazed overhead, making her sweat through her loose cotton dress. "Just gotta make it to Mrs. Henderson's," she whispered to herself, feeling the baby kick restlessly inside her. She was picking up some fresh eggs for dinner, something simple John might actually appreciate for once. But then it happened. Her foot caught on a raised piece of concrete and down she went, hard. The fall knocked the wind right out of her. Pain shot through her side as she lay there on the hot pavement, groceries scattered everywhere. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, checking, praying the baby was okay. "Oh, honey, are you all right?" Mrs. Peterson rushed over from her garden, dirt still on her knees. "Let me help you up, dear." Before Margaret could even catch her breath, she heard John's work boots pounding on the pavement behind her. Her heart sank. She knew that angry stride. "What in blazes is going on here?" John's voice cut through the air like a knife, but when he saw her on the ground, his face twisted into something ugly, something mean. "You're too fat to be the mother of my children," he shouted loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "Look at you. You can't even walk straight." Margaret felt her cheeks burn with shame as neighbors started coming out of their houses. Mrs. Peterson and old Mr. Davies were already helping her to her feet, but John just stood there, hands on his hips, shaking his head like she'd done something terrible on purpose. "That child's gonna be as weak as its mother," he kept going, his voice getting louder and meaner. "Can't even take care of herself. How's she gonna take care of a baby?" Sharp pains started shooting across Margaret's belly. Real pains, not the usual aches and twinges, but something that made her double over and gasp. "John," she whispered, reaching for his arm. "Something's wrong. The baby—" But he just pulled away from her touch like she was contagious. "Just another lazy woman making a scene," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, always looking for attention. The pain hit her again, stronger this time, making her knees buckle. Mrs. Peterson caught her arm. "Margaret, honey, we need to get you to the hospital right now." But John was already walking away, his voice trailing behind him. "She'll be fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Don't need to make a federal case out of it." And as Margaret stood there, pain washing over her in waves, while her husband's cruel words echoed down the street, she had no idea that those weren't just labor pains starting early. Those pains were about to change everything, forever. By 10 o'clock that night, Margaret knew something was terribly wrong. The pains had gotten worse, coming in waves that made her bite down on her pillow to keep from screaming. John had stormed off to Murphy's bar after dinner, muttering about dramatic women and making mountains out of molehills. Left her all alone in their tiny house, with nothing but the ticking of the old kitchen clock for company. "Lord, please help me," she whispered, gripping the bedpost as another contraction hit. This was way too early, way too soon. Mrs. Thompson from next door must have heard her moaning through the thin walls. Before Margaret knew it, the elderly woman was bustling through the unlocked front door with her medical bag and that determined look she got when somebody needed help. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Thompson said, taking one look at Margaret doubled over on the bed. "This baby's coming tonight, ready or not." For the next 3 hours, Margaret fought the hardest battle of her life. Mrs. Thompson worked by lamplight, her weathered hands gentle but sure. She'd delivered half the babies in town over the past 40 years. "Push now, dear. Just a little more," Mrs. Thompson encouraged, but Margaret could hear something worried in her voice. When the baby finally came, the room went dead silent. No crying, no little gasps, nothing. Margaret raised her head, exhausted and terrified. "Is she okay? Why isn't she crying?" Mrs. Thompson had the tiny baby in her arms, working frantically, rubbing the little chest, clearing the airway, doing everything she knew how to do, but the baby lay still as stone. "Come on, little one," Mrs. Thompson whispered urgently. "Come on now." That's when John stumbled through the front door, reeking of whiskey and cigarettes. He took one look at the scene. Margaret collapsed and bleeding, Mrs. Thompson holding a lifeless baby, and his face went cold. "I knew it," he slurred, swaying in the doorway. "A weak woman only brings weak children." "John, please." Margaret sobbed, reaching for him. "Our baby." But he just stood there, that cruel smile spreading across his face like he'd been proven right about something. Mrs. Thompson shot him a look that could have frozen fire, but she was too busy trying to save that precious little life. The pain and exhaustion finally took Margaret under. She fainted right there on the blood-soaked sheets, her last conscious thought being her baby's silence. What happened in those dark minutes while she was unconscious? What John whispered to Mrs. Thompson? What he threatened? What terrible choice he forced that good woman to make? That secret would haunt them all. Because what John did with that child while Margaret lay there helpless would be the cruelest thing any father could ever do. 15 years. 15 long, empty years since that terrible night. Margaret had never been the same after losing her baby. The grief ate at her soul like a slow poison, and she found comfort in the only place she could: food, cookies, ice cream, anything sweet enough to dull the aching hole in her heart. She'd gained over 100 pounds, barely leaving the house anymore. John treated her worse than ever, always reminding her she was the woman who couldn't even keep a baby alive. Their marriage had become a cold, cruel prison. Every night she'd sit in that old rocking chair by the window, staring out at other families walking their children to school, pushing strollers, living the life she'd never have. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Margaret," the voice was weak, shaky. "Mrs. Thompson, now 87 and dying of cancer. I need to see you, honey, right away. There's something I got to tell you before I meet my maker." Margaret hadn't spoken to Mrs. Thompson much over the years. Too painful. Too many memories. But something in the old woman's voice made her heart race. She drove to the nursing home with trembling hands, finding Mrs. Thompson propped up in bed, looking frail as tissue paper. "Close the door, dear," Mrs. Thompson whispered. "What I'm about to tell you is going to turn your world upside down." Margaret sat down heavy in the plastic chair, her stomach already knotting with dread. "That night," Mrs. Thompson began, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "That awful night 15 years ago. I lied to you, Margaret. I lied, and it's been eating me alive ever since." "What do you mean?" Margaret's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Your baby didn't die, honey. She didn't die." The words hit Margaret like a freight train. The room started spinning, her vision going dark around the edges. "John forced me to lie," Mrs. Thompson sobbed. "He said terrible things, threatened me, said if I told anyone that baby was alive, he'd make sure I lost my nursing license. He took that precious child and gave her to some family in the next county, told them she was an orphan." Margaret couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but sit there as 15 years of grief and rage crashed over her like a tidal wave. "Where?" she finally choked out. "Where is my daughter?" Mrs. Thompson pressed a piece of paper into Margaret's shaking hands. An address, a name. The Miller family. They named her Anna Grace. When Margaret heard those words, her world didn't just collapse, it exploded and came alive at the same time. Margaret drove home in a daze, Mrs. Thompson's words echoing in her head like thunder. Her baby was alive. Anna Grace was alive. She found John in his usual spot, sprawled on the couch, beer in hand, watching some game on their old TV. The sight of him sitting there, so casual, so comfortable, made something snap inside her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady for the first time in years. John barely glanced up. "What now? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Mrs. Thompson told me the truth, John, about our baby, about what you did." Now she had his attention. His face went pale, then hard as stone. "That old woman's lost her mind," he said, but Margaret could see the panic in his eyes. "Making up crazy stories on her deathbed. She gave me the address, John. The Miller family. Anna Grace." Margaret's voice got stronger with each word. "I know where my daughter is." John jumped up, pointing his finger at her like a weapon. "You listen to me, Margaret. That's just some sick fantasy. The baby died, and that's the end of it." "I'm going to the police," Margaret said quietly. "I'm going to tell them everything." That's when John's mask finally slipped. His face twisted into something cold and cruel, and for the first time, Margaret saw the real man she'd married. "Go ahead," he said with a laugh that made her skin crawl. "Tell them. I did it for your own good, Margaret. You were never fit to be a mother. Look at yourself. You can't even take care of yourself." His words hit her like physical blows, but something strange happened. Instead of crumbling like she always did, Margaret felt something new rising up inside her, something fierce and powerful. "You're right," she said, standing up straighter. "I wasn't fit then, but I am now." That night, After John stomped out to his usual bar, Margaret stood in front of the bathroom mirror and made herself a promise. She was going to get her daughter back, no matter what it took. She threw out every piece of junk food in the house, started walking every morning at sunrise, joined a gym with her grocery money, found a church where she could pray without judgment, asking God for the strength to become the mother Anna Grace deserved. Months passed. The pounds started melting away. Her body got stronger, but more importantly, her spirit got stronger too. But while Margaret was transforming herself from the inside out, becoming a force of nature driven by 15 years of buried love, John was busy making phone calls, secret calls, because he wasn't going to let some weak woman destroy the life he'd built on lies. 10 months later, Margaret didn't even recognize herself in the mirror. 70 pounds gone. Her face had shape again, cheekbones emerging like they'd been hiding under years of sorrow. But the real change was in her eyes. They burned with a purpose she'd forgotten she could feel. Every morning at 5, she'd lace up her sneakers and hit the pavement. Every evening, she'd kneel beside her bed and pray for strength to face what was coming. Sunday worship services filled her with hope she hadn't felt since she was young. "Lord," she'd whisper, "help me be the mother Anna Grace needs me to be." The address Mrs. Thompson had given her was burned into her memory, 412 Maple Street, Riverside County. She'd driven by the modest White House 3 times, heart pounding like a teenager's, gathering courage she didn't know she had. Through careful research at the library, she'd learned everything she could. Anna Grace Miller, 15 years old, attended Riverside High School. Honor roll student, despite everything. That made Margaret's heart swell with pride and break with sadness all at once. She'd copied her old hospital records, gotten a lawyer's advice, gathered every piece of evidence that proved Anna Grace was hers. The birth certificate John thought he'd destroyed, she'd found it hidden in his tool shed along with other papers he'd kept, just in case. Margaret was ready to reclaim the daughter stolen from her 15 years ago. But John had been watching, waiting. He'd noticed the weight loss, the new clothes, the determined look in his wife's eyes. When he found the copied documents in her purse, his face went darker than she'd ever seen it. "You think you're smart, don't you?" He cornered her in the kitchen that morning. "All skinny and pretty again, thinking you can just waltz back into that girl's life. She's my daughter, John. My blood." Margaret's voice didn't shake anymore. "Nothing you say can change that. If you show up there," he leaned in close, his breath hot and mean, "you'll regret it for the rest of your life. That girl has a family now. You want to destroy that because you're feeling guilty." But Margaret just looked at him with those new eyes that had seen through his lies and found something stronger underneath. "I'm going to see my daughter," she said simply, "today." At 3:15 that afternoon, Margaret parked across from Riverside High School. Her hands shook as she watched the students pour out of the building, backpacks bouncing, voices calling to friends. And then she saw her. When Margaret laid eyes on Anna Grace for the first time in 15 years, that beautiful girl with her own eyes and her grandmother's smile, nothing else in the world mattered. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. There she was, Anna Grace, walking slowly toward the school gate with her head down, shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of the world. Even from across the street, Margaret could see everything. The girl's clothes were clean, but old, patched in places, too big for her thin frame. Her backpack was held together with duct tape, and she walked alone while other kids laughed and chatted in groups. But it was her face that broke Margaret's heart. Those were her own eyes staring back at her, sad, tired, like they'd seen too much for 15 years of living. Anna Grace looked like a flower trying to grow in rocky soil. Margaret started to get out of her car, her mother's heart pulling her forward like a magnet. She had to talk to her, had to tell her who she was, had to... "Anna Grace Miller!" A harsh voice cut through the afternoon air. "Get over here right now!" Margaret froze as she watched a middle-aged couple march toward the school gate. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, she recognized them from her research, but seeing them in person made her stomach turn. Mrs. Miller was thin and sharp-faced, with mean little eyes that seemed to find fault with everything. Mr. Miller was a big man, who walked like he owned the world, his voice loud enough to make other parents turn and stare. "What are you doing? Standing around like you got nothing better to do?" Mrs. Miller snapped at Anna Grace. "You were supposed to be here 5 minutes ago." "I'm sorry," Anna Grace whispered, her voice so small Margaret had to strain to hear it. "Mrs. Peterson kept me after class to help with—" "Don't give me excuses," Mr. Miller barked. "Hurry up, you useless child. We got work to do at home and you're already behind on your chores." Margaret watched in horror as Anna Grace flinched like she'd been slapped. The poor girl dropped her head even lower and shuffled toward their beat-up truck like a prisoner heading to execution. "And don't think you're eating dinner if that kitchen ain't spotless when we get home," Mrs. Miller added, with a cruel laugh. "Maybe going hungry will teach you to move faster next time." Other parents were staring now, shaking their heads at the scene, but nobody said anything. Nobody stepped in to protect that sweet girl who looked so much like Margaret. It was like seeing herself at 15. Margaret's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white. Every maternal instinct she'd buried under years of grief came roaring back to life like a wildfire. When Margaret saw how they treated her daughter, her precious Anna Grace, who should have been loved and cherished, the mother within her awoke with a roar that 15 years of silence couldn't contain. Margaret didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Anna Grace flinching at those harsh words, saw her thin shoulders carrying burdens no child should bear. 3 days later, Margaret parked in front of 412 Maple Street, her hands steady for the first time in 15 years. She'd prayed all morning for strength, and now she could feel it coursing through her veins like liquid fire. The house looked even shabbier up close. Peeling paint, broken shutters, a front porch that sagged under the weight of neglect. This was where her daughter had grown up. This was the better life John had chosen for her baby. Margaret marched up to the front door and knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. Mrs. Miller answered, her face already twisted into its usual scowl. "What do you want? If you're selling something, I want to see Anna Grace's birth certificate," Margaret said, her voice clear and strong, "and I want to see it right now." Mrs. Miller's face went pale, then red. "Who do you think you are, coming to my house making demands?" "I'm her mother," Margaret said simply, "her real mother." That got Mr. Miller's attention. He came stomping to the door, all bluster and threats. "You're crazy, lady. Anna Grace is our daughter, been ours for 15 years. Show me the adoption papers then." Margaret crossed her arms. "Show me the legal documents." The silence that followed told Margaret everything she needed to know. The Millers looked at each other like trapped animals, and Margaret felt her heart sink, even as her anger rose. "There are no papers, are there?" she said quietly. "You never legally adopted her. She was just given to you." Mrs. Miller's face crumpled. "We took care of her, fed her, clothed her. You made her a servant." Margaret's voice rose to a roar. "I saw how you treat her. That poor child looks like she hasn't had a decent meal in months. She earns her keep," Mr. Miller said defensively. "Builds character, better than being spoiled rotten. She's 15 years old." Margaret stepped forward and both Millers stepped back. "She should be playing with friends, not scrubbing your floors and going hungry when she doesn't move fast enough. You can't prove nothing," Mrs. Miller whispered, but her voice shook. "Watch me," Margaret said. "Anna Grace is my daughter, and I came to take her home." That's when Anna Grace appeared in the hallway behind them, drawn by the shouting. Her eyes went wide when she saw Margaret. This stranger who looked so familiar it made her heart ache. "Who are you?" Anna Grace whispered. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama, baby girl. Your real mama." Anna Grace stared at her for a long moment, and then she spoke the words that shattered Margaret's heart into a million pieces. "If you're my real mama, then why did you throw me away?" Those words hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. "Throw you away." She knelt down to Anna Grace's eye level, her voice breaking. "Oh, sweet girl, I never threw you away. I never wanted to give you up." Anna Grace's eyes filled with tears that had been building for 15 years. "But they said my real parents didn't want me, that I was too much trouble, too expensive to keep." "That's a lie, baby. The biggest lie ever told." Margaret reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out an old photo, herself at 8 months pregnant, glowing with love and excitement. "Look at this. Look at how happy I was waiting for you." Anna Grace stared at the picture, her thin fingers tracing Margaret's face. You really wanted me." "I wanted you more than breath itself," Margaret whispered. "Your father, he lied to everyone, told me you died during birth. I've been mourning you for 15 years, never knowing you were alive and needing me." The tears came then, from both of them. Anna Grace threw herself into Margaret's arms, and it felt like coming home after the longest, darkest journey imaginable. "Why did he do it?" Anna Grace sobbed into Margaret's shoulder. "Why would he take me away from you?" "Because he was scared and selfish." Margaret held her daughter tight. "But I'm here now, and I'm never letting you go again." "You can't just take her," Mrs. Miller shrieked, finding her voice. "She belongs to us. We raised her. You enslaved her." Margaret stood up, Anna Grace clinging to her hand. "And it's over. "Anna Grace, do you want to come home with me?" Anna Grace looked back at the Millers, the only family she'd ever known, despite their cruelty. Then she looked at Margaret, at this stranger who felt more like home than anything she'd ever experienced. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to go with my real mama." Mr. Miller stepped forward, his face red with rage. "Over my dead body. You can't prove she's yours." But Margaret pulled out the birth certificate, the midwife records, everything she'd gathered. "Anna Grace Elizabeth Thompson Johnson, born March 15th, 2010, to Margaret Thompson Johnson. That's me and that's my daughter." The Millers tried to block the door, but Margaret was no longer the broken woman who'd lost her baby 15 years ago. She was a mother reclaiming her child, and nothing on earth could stop her. "Get out of my way," she said with quiet authority that made both Millers step aside. As Margaret and Anna Grace walked toward the car, hand in hand, Margaret felt complete for the first time since that terrible night. But neither of them knew that John was already making phone calls, setting in motion something that would test their newfound bond in ways Margaret never imagined. When John learned Margaret had found Anna Grace, he did the unthinkable. 3 days after Margaret brought Anna Grace home, the pounding on their front door started at sunrise. Margaret opened it to find John standing there, but he was nothing like the cruel, arrogant man she'd been married to for 20 years. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty, his eyes red and hollow, his hands shaking like leaves in a storm. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice breaking, "please, I need to talk to you." Behind her, Anna Grace peeked around the corner, her face hardening when she saw the man who'd stolen her life. Margaret felt her daughter's small hand slip into hers for support. "What do you want, John?" Margaret's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. "I lost everything," he said, and she could see it was true. Word had spread through their small town like wildfire. John Johnson, the man who'd given away his own baby and lied about it for 15 years. His construction crew had fired him. His drinking buddies at Murphy's bar wouldn't even look at him. The whole town was talking, and none of it was good. "My job's gone," he continued, his voice getting smaller with each word. "Nobody'll hire me. People cross the street when they see me coming. Even my own brother won't take my calls." "Good," Anna Grace said quietly, but her voice carried the weight of 15 years of abandonment. "Now you know how it feels to be thrown away." John's face crumpled like paper in the rain. He dropped to his knees right there on Margaret's front porch, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I was scared," he sobbed. "I was 25 years old and terrified of being a father. When the baby came early and seemed so weak, I panicked. I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Anna Grace stepped forward, her young voice shaking with righteous anger. "You stole 15 years of my life with my mother, 15 years of love and family dinners and bedtime stories. You took that from both of us." "I know," John cried, looking up at his daughter with desperate eyes. "I know I did the most terrible thing a man can do. I was a coward, and I've regretted it every single day since." Margaret stood there watching the man who'd caused her 15 years of agony fall apart in front of their daughter. Part of her wanted to slam the door in his face, to let him suffer the way she'd suffered all those lonely nights. But then she looked at Anna Grace, that beautiful, strong girl who had survived so much, and remembered the words from Sunday service. Forgiveness isn't just for the person who hurt you, it's for your own heart. And the decision Margaret made in that moment would surprise even Anna Grace. Margaret looked at John kneeling there, broken and desperate, then at Anna Grace's face full of hurt and anger. In that moment, she made the choice that would change all their lives forever. "Get up, John," she said quietly, reaching down to help him to his feet. "Come inside." Anna Grace stared at her mother in shock. "Mom, you can't be serious. After everything he did to us." "Anna Grace," Margaret said gently, "hate is too heavy a burden for us to carry anymore. We've all suffered enough." Over the next hour, sitting around Margaret's kitchen table with cups of coffee growing cold, John told them the whole truth. How he'd been terrified at 25 of being responsible for a tiny life. How he'd panicked when the baby came early and seemed so fragile. How he'd convinced himself he was saving them all from his own failure. "I told myself you'd be better off without me," John whispered, his voice raw. "That some other family could give you what I couldn't. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong." Anna Grace listened with tears in her eyes, seeing for the first time not the villain who'd stolen her life, but a young man who'd made the worst mistake out of fear and immaturity. "I've spent 15 years hating you," she said finally, "wondering why my own father didn't want me. But you were just scared, weren't you?" John nodded. unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Margaret reached across the table and took both their hands. "We can't change the past," she said, "but we can choose what happens next. Anna Grace, do you think you could try to forgive your father? Not for him, but for us, for our family." It wasn't easy. It took months of family counseling at their church, lots of tears, and even more prayers. But slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild what had been broken 15 years ago. John quit drinking completely and found work as a handyman, determined to prove he could be the father Anna Grace deserved. Margaret continued her transformation, becoming a pillar of strength who showed them both what real love looked like. And Anna Grace? She blossomed like a flower finally planted in good soil. With two parents who loved her unconditionally, she found her voice, her confidence, and her joy. 6 months later, the three of them sat around that same kitchen table, but this time they were laughing over Sunday dinner, sharing stories, planning Anna Grace's sweet 16 party. "You know what?" Anna Grace said, looking at both her parents with eyes that sparkled with happiness instead of tears. "I wouldn't change anything. All that pain led us here, to this moment, to being a real family." Margaret smiled, watching her husband help their daughter with her homework, like he'd been doing it her whole life. Sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most broken beginnings. Their family was finally complete. Margaret's story shows us that no matter how deep the wounds, no matter how many years of pain we've endured, it's never too late to fight for what truly matters. She could have stayed broken, could have let John's cruelty define her forever, but she chose transformation over defeat, love over hatred, and hope over despair. Sometimes life takes everything from us, our children, our dreams, our very sense of worth. But Margaret proves that even when we think we've lost it all, there's still a fighter inside us waiting to rise up. She didn't just get her daughter back, she got herself back. She became the woman, the mother, the force of nature she was always meant to be. Now I want to ask you something that might change your life. What dream have you given up on? What relationship have you written off as hopeless? What part of yourself have you buried under years of disappointment and pain? Margaret was 53 when she decided to transform her entire existence for love. If she can do it, what's your excuse? Here's the truth that most people don't want to hear. You're not too old, it's not too late, and you're stronger than you think. But you have to make the choice. You have to decide that your story isn't over, that your best chapters are still waiting to be written. Margaret spent 15 years believing her daughter was gone forever. Imagine if she'd never found out the truth, never fought to reclaim what was hers. What are you going to reclaim? What battle are you finally ready to fight? Stop waiting for permission, stop making excuses, and start becoming the person your dreams deserve. Your family, your future, your very soul is counting on you to rise up and transform your life. If this story moved you, if Margaret's courage inspired you to believe in second chances, then subscribe to our channel right now and hit that notification bell. Don't let this be just another story you watched. Let it be the moment everything changed for you. And hey, click on that video appearing on your screen right now to continue watching more incredible true stories of transformation, hope, and the power of never giving up. Your next inspiration is just one click away.